I have a legal right, and I will prove it. Why am I being treated as if the policy on the wall does not include me?
We are following procedure.
Angela's words lingered in the air, sharper than any winter wind slipping through the boutique doors. The receipt sat on the counter like silent proof, yet the manager's cold reply weighed heavier than the glass walls around them. Shoppers held their breath, sensing that what began as a simple return had become something larger contest between dignity and power. Outside, the holiday bells rang cheerfully, but inside, the question of justice grew louder. This was no longer just about one woman and a box, but about who is allowed to be heard. If you believe dignity must never be denied, leave a comment, justice, and follow for the next chapter. The holiday lights along Fifth Avenue glowed like a ribbon of small stars as the afternoon tilted toward evening, and shoppers moved in slow, bright currents past the tall windows. Inside the boutique, the air smelled faintly of cedar and new fabric. Angela Williams stepped through the revolving door with a paper receipt folded neatly in her glove and a small box tucked under her arm. She had chosen a quiet hour, the kind of lull when music flows without having to rise above chatter. She greeted the greeter with a nod and a warm hello, then took her place behind a velvet rope that guided customers toward the main counter. A receipt can become evidence or become excuse to deny it, she thought, and she willed herself to keep that thought gentle, like a reminder rather than a warning. Her goal was simple: exchange one item for another, exactly as the printed policy allowed during the holiday season. She did not hurry. She watched the familiar city rituals outside, people cupping warm paper cups in their hands, a family pointing toward the ice rink at Rockefeller, a taxi easing to the curb with a low, patient rumble. She had been in rooms louder than this and harder than this. The knowledge steadied her breath. The boutique's light was white and even, an indoor winter Sunday. To her left, a woman with soft silver hair studied a row of scarves, pausing often as if each color carried a memory. The name on her toe tag read Margaret. Near a mirrored pillar, a young woman in a denim jacket scrolled on her phone, then lifted her eyes in quick, curious glances. The name on her nameplate necklace read Isabella. By the entrance, a security guard named David stood with his hands folded, a posture that said he hoped nothing dramatic would happen today. At the long counter, a man in a tailored jacket watched the room the way a head waiter watches a dining room, one eye on standards, one eye on the clock. His nameplate read Mark Stevens. Next to him, a staff associate, Susan Miller-Sorted, returns with efficient precision, her movements neat as folded ribbon. Angela reached the counter when it was her turn and laid the small box and receipt on the glass. "Good afternoon," she said. "I would like to exchange this, please. It was a gift, purchased here. The fit is not quite right." She spoke in the calm voice that keeps rooms breathable. She slid the receipt forward, the printed words clear: holiday return policy extended through the middle of January. Mark's smile stayed on his face, but not in his eyes. He picked up the box without opening it, then glanced at the receipt the way one glances at a street sign when already certain of the way. "Where was this bought?" he asked. "On this floor," Angela answered. "I was here the same afternoon." She offered a kind smile. "If you prefer, I can look up the last 4 letters of the card used." Susan leaned in with a professional eagerness that had no warmth in it. "Do you have the original packaging?" she asked, even as the original packaging sat between them. Angela lifted the lid. Inside, the item lay as it had been placed by the clerk who had sold it. Tissue paper smooth, tag secured, receipt stapled to the inner flap. She waited while Mark looked from the item to the paper policy framed on the wall behind the counter, where the words promised an extension through the holiday season. He did not turn to read it closely. He looked at Angela instead. "We're not accepting this," he said, his voice polite in the way a door can be politely closed. Angela did not flinch. "May I ask, why not? The policy is on the wall, and the receipt is dated during that period." His tone stayed pleasant. "The policy does not apply in every case." "It appears to apply in this one," Angela said, keeping her voice measured. Unused tags on, original packaging, receipt within the window. Susan's fingers hovered over the keyboard without typing. "Sometimes items are purchased elsewhere and brought here," she said. We cannot verify all claims. Angela breathed in and let the breath out like a quiet count. I can verify this claim, she answered. If you need a manager, we can ask a manager. You are speaking with him, Mark replied, and I am declining the exchange. She let a calm silence sit between them, because silence can ask better questions than anger. Then may I have your reason in writing? She said. A sentence will do, with your name, so that I can follow up with customer relations. He paused. The boutique noise thinned, as it often does when the room recognizes an edge. David shifted near the door but did not move. Margaret, further down, lowered her silver head and glanced over. Isabella lifted her phone a fraction, the screen dark but ready. I do not need to provide a written statement at this time, Mark said, careful with each word. This is our internal decision. Your policy is posted publicly, Angela answered. Perhaps we can look at it together. She turned, not to challenge, but to share what was plain to see. The frame on the wall was at eye level. The holiday return policy, written in friendly font, extended returns through mid-January with the conditions she had already met. Mark did not turn. Ma'am, he said, and the word landed not as respect but as formality. I am going to ask you to take back your item and leave it as it island. Angela placed a hand on the box, not possessively, but to keep it from being swept somewhere wrong. I am still within your posted window, she said, soft as a reminder. She felt her pulse steady like a metronome. She could afford to be patient. She could afford to be clear. The shoppers behind her grew quiet in that almost festive way when people sensed they might witness something they will later describe as a story about a store and a woman and a rule that suddenly bent. The holiday melody from the ceiling speaker kept on, determined not to notice any discord beneath it. Outside, a carriage bell chimed once and then again, small sounds of winter mixing with the city's deeper hum. Susan's voice slipped in from the side, still arranged to sound polite. Perhaps this item would be a better fit at a different location, she suggested. Each store has some discretion. You know how it island? Angela studied Susan's face efficient, practiced, a little tired around the eyes, and then returned her gaze to Mark. I chose this location because it is where the item was purchased, she said. I am only asking for what the policy promises. Mark's pleasantness thinned. He lifted the receipt again, as if a second glance might reveal a loophole his first had not. Sometimes the people who come in here, he began, and then paused, searching for a word he could say out loud, are not the clientele this policy is designed to accommodate. The sentence hung, unfinished and yet complete. It is a particular kind of code that has nothing to do with wind. Angela felt it cross the counter like an invisible draft. Sir, she said, because respect belongs to the speaker even when the listener does not earn it. The policy names conditions, not people. I have met them. He smiled without smiling. As I said, not in this case. At the far end of the counter, Margaret touched a scarf and then let it fall back into place, her hand trembling slightly. She glanced toward Angela, then toward Mark, then down again, as if the pattern of the scarf might tell her what to do. David's stance shifted. One foot set back, ready to walk forward if asked. Isabella's phone screen brightened, a small square of light held at chest height. Angela decided to try once more, because fairness deserves more than one knock on the same door. If there is a supervisor above you, she said, we can call together. I am sure they will clarify. Why so wise? Mark nodded as if he had been waiting for the line. David, he called gently toward the door, would you join us a moment? The guard approached, not hurried, not slow. He stopped an arm's length away, his expression professional but not unkind. How can I help? He asked, directing the question not at Angela alone but into the space between all of them. We are going to conclude this interaction, Mark said, eyes on Angela. Please guide this customer to the exit with her merchandise, and if she has further questions, she can contact customer service by email. David did not reach for Angela's arm. He did not need to. His presence was the instruction. He looked at her, and in that look was a wish that this could be solved a softer way. Angela turned a fraction enough to see the front door and the blur of people moving outside under the lights. There were so many ways to leave a room, she thought, and not all of them involved walking. She returned her gaze to the counter, to the framed policy, to Mark's neat tie and untroubled jaw. She picked up the receipt between two fingers and set it down again, squared with the edge of the glass. "May I repeat my request for a written reason?" she asked. For the record she kept in her head when rooms required it. Mark exhaled through his nose. A soft, almost sympathetic sound. "We do not need to justify every decision we make," he said, "especially when a customer does not fit the profile for this location." The words were quiet, but quiet can carry far. They reached the woman with the silver hair. They reached the young woman with the phone. They reached the guard whose posture shifted from neutral to uneasy. Outside, another carriage bell chimed, and the sound slipped through the seam of the door like winter through a window frame. Angela let the cold pass through her and out again. She placed her gloves side by side on the counter, opened her palm, and pressed it lightly to the receipt as if to warm the ink. She looked at Mark, not with anger, but with the kind of attention one gives the final answer on a test whose questions one already understands. "I have a legal right, and I will prove it." The large frame sign on the wall promised kindness in plain language. The holiday return policy extended through mid-January, but what should have been a simple courtesy felt like a door quietly locking from the other side. The remark Angela had absorbed a few minutes earlier lingered like frost on glass, a suggestion that policy could be bent by preference and preference could be guided by prejudice. She steadied her breath and kept her posture open, because her intention remained unchanged. Complete a straightforward exchange within the rules the store itself displayed. The counter lights cast a clean, bright sheen over the glass. Outside, Fifth Avenue rolled along in a soft parade of winter coats and paper cups with red sleeves. The boutique's music was a slow carol, the kind meant to be background rather than argument. Angela angled her gaze toward the framed sign as if inviting it to join the conversation. She was not trying to win a scene. She was trying to keep faith with the ordinary decency that lets a city function. Mark's smile held a precise fixture. Susan's fingers hovered over the keyboard as though she were ready to type a justification once someone gave her one that fit the outcome already chosen. The people waiting behind Angela fell into the alert quiet of bystanders who suspect they are present at the moment a line is about to be crossed. Near a rack of winter scarves, the woman with silver hair, Margaret, judging by the tag on her toe watch, with that careful attention older people develop after a lifetime of rooms like this one. By the mirror pillar, Isabella lifted her phone slightly, as if checking the battery, as if the act of being ready could make the moment behave. Angela tapped the paper receipt with a single finger to keep it flat. "Your policy is right there," she said, calm and clear. "Unused, tags attached, original packaging, receipt within the window. I would like to follow your process, not trouble it." Mark's tone remained gentle, an excellent imitation of patience. "The sign is a guideline," he said. "Managers retain discretion in special cases." "What makes this a special case?" Angela asked. Susan supplied a suggestion without meeting Angela's eyes. "Sometimes items come in that appear to be from another location. The packaging can be misleading." Angela opened the box, not with a flourish, but precisely. The tissue paper lay unwrinkled. The tag was secured by the same clear filament the sales associate had looped through it. The receipt was stapled to the inner flap, the staple legs unbent. She held it forward, the way one offers an affidavit to a clerk who has asked for one. "It was purchased here," she said. "I am happy to wait while you scan the receipt or look up the transaction by the last four letters of the card." Mark did not reach for the scanner. "Verification systems are not perfect," he said. "We prefer to exercise caution." "Caution usually means checking," Angela replied, the edges of her voice rounded by courtesy. "You are declining to check." "Funky." He set the box down with deliberate care, then folded his hands as if arranging the scene for a photograph. "Ma'am," he said, the honorific drained of its warmth, "we curate the experience in this store. Not every request aligns with it." In the small silence that followed, the boutique felt like a theater in which the audience had leaned forward at the same time. The holiday melody moved one phrase further and seemed suddenly to be playing for a different reason. Angela breathed in and let the breath go. Patience is also power, she reminded herself, because it gives shape to the next sentence. The experience you curate, she said, includes the policy you publish. If you wish to make an exception, please state it specifically so I can address it. Susan reached for the box, then withdrew her hand as if the tissue were fragile. There have been instances, she said, when customers attempted to exchange items purchased at outlet locations. All returns here are different. This item was purchased on this floor, Angela answered. If the point of sale needs confirmation, please perform it. That is what the scanner is for. Margaret shifted closer, the scarves brushing her sleeve. She did not speak, but her presence moved like a small shelter toward the counter. Isabella's screen brightened. David, by the door, widened his stance in the way people do when told they might be needed but not why. Mark's pleasantness narrowed into policies. We have to maintain standards, he said. This store has a particular clientele. Sometimes we must rely on judgment to protect that. Angela kept her gaze steady. Judgment should serve a rule, she said softly, not replace one. A couple entered behind David, shaking snow from their hats. A child's laugh skipped briefly across the room and disappeared. On the counter, the framed sign refused to blush. Extended through mid-January, unopened, tags attached, receipt required. Angela thought of all the ordinary exchanges that keep a city civilized drivers yielding at crosswalks, lines forming without ropes, thank you said and meant, and felt a grief that such a simple practice had to be defended as if it were a novelty. She tried the practical path again. If there's an above store contact who can clarify, she said, we can make that call. I am prepared to wait. Mark's reply was smooth and completed. We have already clarified here, he said. I am not approving this exchange. Angela glanced at the scanner, the printer, the receipt tray, the instruments of routine fairness arrayed like instruments on a nurse's cart. She pictured the keystrokes that would acknowledge her request and the small slip of paper the printer would issue, and she pictured, with equal clarity, the entirely different ritual she had seen so many times. A refusal dressed in courtesy and secured by the hope that the person refused would choose to leave rather than insist. May I ask whether your refusal is based on the condition of the item? She said. The date on the receipt, the packaging, or some other stated requirement. Mark smiled in a way that said he enjoyed games whose rules he wrote in pencil. It is based on my responsibility to manage this location in line with brand expectations that contradict your written policy, Angela said, tend to become liabilities. He shook his head, not in disagreement, but in dismissal. You are welcome to email customer service. The phrase was a path and a dismissal at once. Angela looked at the framed sign again as if to confirm that language could still mean what it said when mounted under glass. She noticed tiny details. A slight waviness at the edge of the mat, a faint reflection of the chandelier. She allowed herself one private thought, not of anger, but of inventory. The number of times she had offered a gentle, ordinary request and been handed a test instead. Margaret stepped a little nearer, her voice careful, the way one approaches a sleeping child. Excuse me, she said to Mark. I am not trying to interfere, but the policy appears quite clear. Mark turned the charm toward her. We appreciate your loyalty, he said, and we do our best to keep the store comfortable for everyone. For everyone, Margaret repeated, not as agreement but as an inquiry. Susan's gaze circled the room as if counting the seconds this conversation had been on display. We can process other customers while you consider your options, she said to Angela. The offer shaped like kindness and arranged like a queue jump that would move Angela to the side without moving her request forward. Angela stayed at the counter. I will remain here, she said, until we reach a proper conclusion. Aye. David took 2 measured steps closer, stopping short of the zone where proximity would feel like pressure. Ma'am, he said, and the word was warmer when he used it. If you need a quieter place to talk, we can step over there. Thank you, Angela answered, and managed a small smile that let him know she understood his position. The counter is the right place. This is a counter problem. Mark drew a breath through his nose, a practice reset. We are done here, he said, each word clipped but low. Take the item with you. Email customer service. They will respond in due course. Due course. Angela thought of how often that phrase had been used to extend a refusal beyond the point where the refused could follow. She looked down at the receipt, not to confirm its accuracy. She had done that twice already, but to remind herself that the plainest truths are sometimes the easiest to overlook, and overlooking them is how harm disguises itself as process. She named the truths out loud, evenly, as if reading them into the record. The item is unused. The tags are attached. The original packaging is present. The receipt is valid during the window your sign promises. You have tools to verify the purchase. You are choosing not to use them. Susan's fingers finally met the keyboard, not to scan, but to type a note into a private field. Her voice remained professional. "We're not accusing you of anything," she said. "We simply cannot process this at this location." Angela watched the keys move. "Language matters," she said. "You have not accused me, but you have implied that I do not belong to the category of people for whom this policy exists." Mark's smile hardened. "This discussion is over. A hush gathered that was not quite silence. Even the music seemed to take one step back to make room for what would be said next. Isabella shifted her weight and, without lifting her phone higher, angled it so that the microphone would catch voices cleanly. Margaret's hand found the edge of the scarf table and held it lightly, like the railing on a ship deck. Angela let the weight of what had been said settle. She thought of the thousands of small encounters that teach a person either to shrink or to stand. She did not like scenes. She liked solutions. But she understood that some scenes were the only bridges to solutions people had been denied politely. Her eyes returned to Mark's. She kept her tone measured, not because she lacked feeling, but because she had chosen which feeling to serve. "Are you certain you want to continue refusing?" A hush spread outward from the counter like a ripple, and the boutique's music, a slow carol meant to soothe, seemed to lower its own voice as if not to interrupt what was happening. Angela held her place, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the glass. The words she had spoken only moments before asked in courtesy, weighted in meaning still hung between her and the manager. "Are you certain you want to continue refusing?" He had not answered her question. He had simply repeated his position, and the repetition had turned a refusal into a stance. She looked toward the entrance where the winter light pooled in a pale rectangle on the floor. Beyond the revolving door, Fifth Avenue drifted by, a current of coats and scarves and paper cups with red sleeves. The air that seeped in each time someone entered brought with it the faint smell of street pretzels and the faraway clink of carriage bells. David, the guard, stood a step closer than before, not quite in the conversation and not quite outside it. He had the attentive stillness of someone trained to be present without becoming the event. His eyes moved from Angela to the manager and back again. Susan gathered a small stack of returns and set them down, and then did not touch them, her fingers hovering as if her hands were listening for instructions her ears could not hear. Near a display of winter scarves, the woman with silver hair, Margaret, shifted a few inches toward Angela, her toad brushing the edge of the table. By the mirror pillar, Isabella held her phone low and angled. The lens pointed toward nothing in particular while the microphone listened to everything. The phone's screen, dimmed to a soft glow, traced a narrow band of light along her thumb. Angela felt the familiar press of a room turning into a test. She steadied her breath the way one steadies a picture frame, a small correction that changes what an entire wall feels like. She would keep her posture open, she would keep her voice even. She would ask only for what the sign promised and the receipt recorded. She traced the edge of the paper, aligning its corner with the grooved edge of the counter. The gentle click of the alignment felt like a decision made, small but final. "Ma'am," David said quietly, and in his voice the words sounded like respect rather than procedure. "I am here to make sure everyone stays comfortable. If you want a quieter spot to talk, we can step just to the side." Angela offered him a warm, quick smile that recognized his courtesy. "The counter is where counters are resolved," she said. "Thank you." Mark, the manager, adjusted his tie by the knot, a precise touch that said less about fabric than about control. "We are concluding this interaction," he said. careful to keep his voice in the register of customer service. You may take your item with you. Customer service will respond in due course.是播的. A murmur moved through the small line behind Angela, a soft weather frown of surprise and disapproval and curiosity. Angela kept her gaze on Mark. Due course. She repeated in a tone that treated the phrase as language rather than fate. Then let us put in writing what you are deciding today. The sign says the policy extends through the middle of January. The item is unused. The tags are attached. The packaging is original. The receipt is valid. Will you put in writing the reason this store declines to honor its posted policy? We do not need to issue a written statement for every individual decision, Mark replied. The sentence polished, smooth from use. We reserve discretion to protect the brand experience. Brand experience that does not align with brand policy tends to become brand liability, Angela said, not to threaten but to note, as if describing a weather pattern that any sailor would recognize. Margaret, whose hands had long practice in smoothing linens and small herds, found her voice. Sir, she said, gentle and clear, the sign behind you is there so customers know what to expect. The lady is asking for what the sign says. We appreciate your loyalty, Mark answered smoothly, turning his charm toward her the way one turns a lamp toward a shadow. We make every effort to keep this space comfortable for everyone. Woman? Our woman? For everyone, Margaret echoed, letting the two words breathe a little, as if to see what they meant when left alone. Isabella's phone, still low in her hand, caught a quiet chime from outside carriage bells again, passing in the street, and then the soft rustle that rooms make when multiple people decide at once to pretend they are not listening. Susan, eyes on her screen, said, We can process other guests while you consider options, ma'am. And the phrasing made consideration sound like leaving. Angela did not step aside. I am not considering options, she said, and the calm in her voice had the quality of a level line across a surgeon's chart. I am asking you to follow your own rule. Mark exhaled, a small sound that said patience and meant wall. David, he said, without raising his voice, please escort this guest to the exit. She may reach customer service by email. David's posture changed a fraction enough to be understood by people trained to watch posture. He did not extend his hand. He did not need to. Presence, when rehearsed correctly, announces itself. He took one slow step, then another, stopping just short of the distance that would have turned proximity into pressure. His eyes sought Angela's, and what she saw there was not threat, but apology for the uniform that made him the instrument other people chose. Sir, David said in a tone meant for Mark, but offered to the room, we can keep voices low and move at the pace of courtesy. Angela turned slightly, letting her gaze sweep the entrance and the slice of Winter City that lived beyond it. The revolving door took in 2 shoppers and released 2 more, coats fluttering, laughter brief and bright, and then gone. She faced the counter again. The framed policy behind Mark reflected a small starburst from the chandelier overhead, a trick of light that looked like truth raising its hand. Before anyone escorts anyone, Angela said, I will ask a final time for a specific reason this store declines to use the verification tools it has. We are not accusing you of anything, Susan said quickly, as if the swiftness could make the sentence truer. We simply cannot process this request at this location. The sentence we are not accusing you belongs to a different conversation, Angela replied, kindness at the edges of her voice to keep it from cutting. What you have implied is not that I did something wrong, but that I am not the sort of person to whom your policy applies. You have not used those words. You have allowed them to do the work without being spoken. No one moved. A pair of boots squeaked faintly somewhere in the store, and the sound seemed almost loud. Mark lifted the box, then set it down again in the exact place it had been, as if the movement could serve as punctuation. We curate the experience of this location, he said. That includes deciding when a policy does not align with our judgment. Judgment untethered from a rule is preference, Angela said. Preference that harms becomes policy by another name. Isabella, still near the mirror column, shifted her stance. The phone in her hand captured the low music, the softened voices, the slip of winter air. Her stomach tightened, not from fear but from the sense that she would be telling someone later what she had seen now, and that the telling would matter. Margaret edged closer, the tip of one shoe landing lightly on the pale rectangle of winter light that reached in from the door. Her face had the bare, fragile look people get when a story happening in front of them awakens a story they thought long finished inside them. "Ma'am," David said softly, "I do not make the rules here. If you would like, I can walk with you and give you the email address where concerns go straight to the regional office." "That is kind of you," Angela answered. "And this is the place where concerns should go. The counter where a refusal is being made in public under a sign that promises otherwise." The carol in the speakers moved into a refrain that felt older than the room. Mark turned slightly toward a side terminal, as if to open a screen where the problem would simply vanish into a log. Angela watched the small performance of process and felt the familiar mixed sadness, because ordinary fairness should not require fortitude. Resolve, because sometimes fortitude is precisely what goodness demands. Behind her, a man in a wool coat cleared his throat, and then, deciding against speech, cleared it again, quieter. A woman further back whispered, "Let her exchange it to no one and to everyone." Susan's fingers resumed a kind of busy stillness, tapping nothing, entering nothing, the way people sometimes perform work to avoid doing it. "I will not raise my voice," Angela said, as much for herself as for them. "I will not turn this into a scene. I will stand here until we finish rightly. Or I will accept your refusal in writing with your name." Mark's expression cooled a degree. "We are not doing that," he said, once more with the confidence of someone who is certain that tradition will carry him where logic cannot. "Then we are at the impasse you have constructed," Angela replied. The room seemed to contract slightly toward the counter, the way a collective breath changes the shape of a space. David moved half a step closer, his hands still folded, his voice lower than the music. "I need you to come with me now," he said, neither harsh nor soft. The sentence like a bridge he had been ordered to build. Angela heard the sentence and, with it, heard every room in which a simple request had been converted into an exit. She could feel the next few beats before they happened. The escort, the door, the crisp release into winter air, the phone number written on a small card, the promise of due course, the long quiet in which due meant never. She felt the weight of those beats, and then she refused to carry them. She took her gloves from the counter and set them gently in her bag. She closed the small box and placed it squarely in front of her. She straightened by a breath, not to make herself larger, but to make the moment proportional to the truth it contained. Her voice, when it came, carried the calm of a person who has determined the measure of the next step and accepted it without ornament. "Then perhaps it is time I let you know who I am." She did not raise her voice. She did not even lift her chin. She only set her bag on the counter, slid the small box a precise inch to the side, and drew from her wallet a slim metal card that caught the boutique's white, light-the-way glass catches sun on a river. The room received the gesture, the way a congregation receives a sudden hush after a hymn. She laid the card on the glass-engraved name, a serial that would mean nothing to most eyes and everything to those who knew where authority lived, and beside it she placed a folded sheaf in a clear sleeve, the top page bearing company letterhead, the sentence she had left at the end of the last exchange, "Then perhaps it is time I let you know who I am," seemed to settle into the objects themselves, as if the card and the papers were a continuation of her voice. She did not push them forward as a dare. She simply made them available to the truth. The boutique's carol thinned to a ribbon in the air. The winter light that sneaked through the revolving door put a pale coin on the floor. The framed promise on the wall holiday returns extended shone as if embarrassed for having needed an advocate. Angela tapped the card once with her forefinger, not to draw attention, but to anchor the moment to something solid. "This is my shareholder access card," she said, calm, even, each word a measured step on a well-built walkway. "And these are the executed documents detailing my investment position. I would like us to verify what they state." Her goal had not changed. Complete a lawful, ordinary exchange, and, if necessary, restore the meaning of a policy to the policy itself. The setting had changed only by a degree. The white light seemed a touch brighter, the air a degree colder, and with it the posture of the people within it. Margaret, the silver-haired customer, angled closer as if drawn by the gravity of a home truth. Isabella, the young woman near the mirror, lowered her phone a breath to steady her hands, and then raised it again, steadier. David, the guard, paused at a respectful distance, his face open, his duty remembered, his conscience awake. Mark, the manager, looked first at the card, then at the letterhead, then back to Angela's face with the expression of a person who senses that a long-trusted map has just left out the road he is standing on. Susan stood a half-step behind him, her fingers still over the keyboard, her eyes flicking to the door as if airflow could provide an alibi. Angela pressed the speakerphone icon and placed her phone on the counter beside the papers. The sound came through clean, the neutral chime of a number connecting, a brief silence, and then the voice clear, professional, bearing the slow confidence of a person paid to finish misunderstandings. Regional office, the voice said. This is Taylor speaking. Angela identified herself, giving her full name, her role as investor, the store number, the reason for the call. She did not hurry across any of it, because haste is often the costume of weak ground. We are at the main counter, she added. The policy is posted. The manager has declined to verify. I have my credentials present and would like confirmation in the hearing of the staff so that we may proceed properly. Taylor's reply moved with the smoothness of a practiced hand. Understood. One moment while I opened the investor registry and store profile. The line clicked softly as keys worked at the other end. In the boutique, the music resumed a verse that sounded older than commerce. Angela stood without moving anything but her breath. Mark adjusted his tie by a fraction and then placed both hands on the counter as if to remind the room who usually owned its center. Susan found a screen to look at. David shifted his weight from one foot to the other and then went still again, a human metronome beating quiet time. Margaret's hands, the hands of someone who had folded 1,000 linens and smoothed 1,000 small storms, rested, white-knuckled, on the strap of her tote. Isabella's phone captured not only voices, but the larger sound of a place rethinking itself. I have the registry, Taylor said, voice bright through the small speaker. Please confirm the spelling of your last name. Angela did. Thank you. I see Angela Williams listed as a principal investor with controlling interest in the holding entity for this brand. I also have the holiday return policy visible. Would you like me to confirm this to the store manager now? Angela's answer was a quiet yes. Mark Stevens, Taylor said, more as an address than a question. Are you at the counter? Mark replied that he was. Mr. Stevens, for the avoidance of doubt, Miss Williams is not only a qualifying customer, but an owner. The posted policy applies to her request. You will honor it. If you require verification of the receipt, perform it now using your point-of-sale tools. If your scanner is unavailable, state why and we will log a service call. You will also refrain from discretionary interpretations that contradict the written policy. Are we clear? The sentence did not grow louder at the end. It grew complete. Mark had the look of a person who has been introduced to a mirror in a crowded room. We are clear, he said, and the we told on him by trying to spread the weight. Good, Taylor replied. Miss Williams, my line will remain open until your exchange is complete. Afterward, I would like to schedule time for a staff refresher on policy, compliance, and bias mitigation. Please advise the time. For now, the immediate action is the exchange. The climax arrived without theatrics, which is how real authority often moves. Mark reached for the box with hands that were technically steady and spiritually shaken. He lifted the lid and, for the first time, actually saw the thing he had refused. The tissue lay unmarred. The tag threaded through its loop. The receipt sat stapled true where a clerk had placed it on the day of purchase. He set the box down and straightened the paper that did not need straightening. We will process the exchange, he said. The room let out a breath it had been holding. Susan's fingers finally found the scanner and made it sing the small, practical chirp that signals a system acknowledging a reality it had been built to acknowledge all along. The printer began its quiet work. The framed policy on the wall did not move, but it felt, to anyone who had ever looked for fairness and found it. As if it had nodded, Margaret exhaled a tiny sound that was almost a prayer. Isabella, still recording, whispered, "It is going through. Not to the phone, but to the world." David's shoulders lowered just enough to tell a careful watcher that some knot inside him had unhitched. Angela did not smile. Relief is not the point of justice, only its symptom. She thanked Taylor by name and asked that the refresher training include a section on the difference between discretion and bias. Taylor promised it would, and then, with Angela's permission, remained on the line until the slip printed and the item was exchanged. Mark handed over the new box with the hushed manners of a man in the library he had mistaken for his living room. "Thank you for your patience," he said, and the sentence tried to behave like courtesy, but wore beneath it the itch of self-preservation. Angela accepted the box with both hands, because dignity does not need a stage, only a standard. The printer offered the final slip. Susan slid it across the glass as if it might break. Angela checked the details, not to catch them out, but to bless the ordinary precision of a process finally used as intended. Outside, a carriage passed, its bells catching the light like small approving stars. The boutique, for a beat, sounded like what it had been billed to be, a place for transactions between equals. She looked around the room. She looked at Susan, who would have to decide what kind of employee she wished to be tomorrow. She looked at David, whose uniform had not kept him from being human. She looked at Margaret, whose quiet courage had crossed the last few feet to stand near the counter. Their eyes met, and a whole conversation about decades and rooms and necessary calm took place without a word. She looked last at Isabella, who held history in a small rectangle of glass and circuitry and will. Then Angela turned back to Mark, because restoration is not complete without reckoning. Her voice carried no triumph, only the evenness of truth delivered at its proper temperature. She touched the metal card once more, slid the clear sleeve of documents back into her bag, and let the silence ripen until it could hold the weight of a sentence said once and remembered for a long time. "Now, do you still think I do not deserve to be served?" The room adjusted around the new fact, the way a ship trims its sails after a sudden change of wind. People shifted, not to leave, but to see more clearly. The exchange receipt still sat warm from the printer. The new box rested in Angela's hands. The speakerphone line remained open, a quiet presence on the counter like a witness who had not yet been dismissed. What had been a refusal dressed as courtesy had been replaced by procedure returned to itself, and, like a muscle long held tense, the boutique exhaled. The murmurs that rose were not sharp. They sounded like fabric unbunching. Mark did not meet Angela's eyes. He adjusted a stack of shopping bags that did not require adjusting, and touched the knot of his tie, as if recalibrating himself there might restore what had tilted. Susan's gaze drifted to the middle distance where some screensaver comm had been installed. When she looked back at Angela, the look carried a stiff apology that did not yet know how to bow. David, relieved of the tension that had made him a hinge, released his shoulders by half a breath, and then returned to the steady posture of a person whose job is to keep rooms humane. Isabella, holding her phone lower now and more openly, let the stream continue. Her voice a low narration meant for people who would watch later. The policy on the wall, the receipt, the confirmation, the way a rule had been asked to act like a rule again. Margaret stepped to Angela's side with the firmness of someone who has made up her mind. "I want to thank you," she said, and her voice, warm and resolute, carried across the counter without volume, for asking for what the sign promised and for staying while it came true. Angela nodded, a gesture that included Margaret and also included the many unseen rooms that had taught both of them to keep their tone steady when the ground should have been. On the speakerphone, Taylor's voice returned, brisk but not rushed. "Miss Williams, I will remain until you signal we can close the call. Mr. Stevens, please note that the refresher for this location will be scheduled within the next few days, and I expect full attendance." Mark said that he understood. He did not say he welcomed it. Susan's hands, eager for tasks with clear edges, began collecting the small detritus of the transaction, the clipped staple legs, the backing from the adhesive receipt, while her eyes stayed level with the horizon of the counter. Angela thanked Taylor and asked that the training covered two matters plainly: the difference between discretion and bias, and the responsibility to act on verifiable facts rather than impressions. Taylor confirmed and asked for times that would not interfere with holiday staffing, Angela offered a window-late afternoon near the close of business, and Taylor agreed, promising to send a calendar invitation and follow with written materials the team could study before the session. The room had become a classroom without anyone naming it as such. Outside, the city continued in winter rhythm. A bus sighed at the curb. A taxi made a small, almost cheerful cough of an engine willing to keep going. The revolving door took in new shoppers flushed from the cold and let out others softened by warmth. Inside, the music threaded through a verse of an old carol. People who had been pretending not to watch stopped pretending. A man in a wool coat gave Angela a nod that carried the weight of a sentence he chose not to speak aloud. A woman farther back swiped away a tear with a small, irritated gesture, as if annoyed at her eyes for telling on her heart. Isabella whispered into her phone, not a commentary, but a catalog. The return accepted, the confirmation on speaker, the receipt. She turned the lens briefly to the sign on the wall, then back to Angela's hands resting calm on the new box. Margaret took a step closer and placed her palm on the counter, not as a barrier, but as a benediction. I have seen rooms like this, she said, more to Angela than to the crowd. They do not always end this way. Angela's reply was quiet and exact. They can, she said, when we insist on it. Mark cleared his throat. He picked up the pen used for signatures and put it down again, then reached for the small bell near the register, thought better of it, and moved his hand away. When he finally spoke, his words were polished until they nearly shone. We apologize for any misunderstanding, he said. The sentence looked like a door that opened into a mirror. Angela let it pass without entering. There was no misunderstanding, she said. Not unkindly. There was a refusal. Now there is a correction. It matters to name them rightly. The truth, when set at room temperature, does not need to be repeated. It needs to be allowed to stand. Susan inhaled as if to speak, and then released the breath as if speech could not carry what should simply be done. Would you like this sent to your home? She asked. Or will you carry it? Angela answered that she would carry it, and that she appreciated the offer. Taylor, on the line, asked whether there was anything further to resolve. Angela considered the counter, the manager, the staff, the watching faces, the posted sign, the white light that showed everything evenly. Yes, she said. 2 things. First, all staff should be reminded that verification tools exist for a reason. Second, the sentence we curate and experience should never again be used to contradict a written policy. Taylor said, understood, and his voice made the words sound like a binding. I will follow up by the end of day. Angela thanked him and, with a small touch of her fingertip, ended the call. The silence that replaced the speaker was not empty. It was the kind of silence in which a room waits to see what shape it will take next. Mark reached for the exchange slip as if to offer it once more, but it was in Angela's hand already. He settled for a soft, thank you for your patience. The phrase, stepping carefully around the earlier refusal as if it were a sleeping dog. Patience is best used on processes that are moving, Angela said. Today, patience was used to start one. She turned slightly toward the watching customers. Her face did not ask for cheers and did not brace for argument. It invited attention the way a front porch light invites a neighbor to step nearer. Everyone here has done one of 2 things, she said. Not raising her voice, helped a rule act like a rule, or watched closely while it did. A few people smiled without moving their mouths. Margaret found Angela's forearm and squeezed once, the way a mother and a daughter might pass courage down a sleeve. Isabella, sensing a moment that would travel far beyond the boutique, lifted her phone a little higher, not to intrude, but to let the sound carry clean. David approached the counter, stopping at respectful distance. Ma'am, he said, the word warmer when he used it. I am glad this resolved as it should. He looked at Mark and then back at Angela. If there's any further assistance you need, I am here. Angela thanked him by name. You kept your voice soft when the room wanted a louder one, she said. That is a skill. He inclined his head, a quiet acknowledgement from a man trained to give and receive them in equal measure. Susan, perhaps surprised at herself, stepped forward with a paper shopping bag. If you prefer the box inside, she said, it will be easier to carry. The offer, small as it was, felt like a first step someone had rehearsed privately. Angela accepted, and as Susan slid the box into the bag, the associate's hands trembled the smallest amount. "Thank you," Angela said. "Tomorrow can be better because of today." Taylor's follow-up email chimed on the store terminal. Susan glanced at the subject line policy confirmation and training details and did not click to open. Mark finally looked at Angela, eyes narrower, not with anger, but with the realization that a narrative he had controlled by habit had been replaced by one he would now have to learn. "We value your business," he said, landing on the sentence merchants use when nothing else will stand steady. "Value is measurable," Angela replied, still gentle. "Today, it will be measured in actions." She let the statement rest where anyone could pick it up later. Margaret angled her body so that she and Angela faced the room the way two women might look out from a porch at a neighborhood they have tended for years. "If you host that training," Margaret said toward Mark without accusation, "I hope my grandchildren find this store kinder when they're my age." The manager nodded too quickly, the nod of a person who wants a scene to end before its meaning is settled. Isabella's stream caught Margaret's sentence cleanly, in headphones far away. Later tonight, someone would pause and nod in their kitchen. A few customers drifted closer, not to crowd, but to be present at a better ending. A young clerk from a different department appeared, tugging nervously at a sleeve hem, and offered Angela a bottle of water as if hospitality could be poured into a small plastic shape. She declined, smiling. "I am fine," she said. "I have what I came for." She held the bag lightly, as if to demonstrate that weight and worth are separate measures. She turned to go, then paused, looking once more at the framed sign on the wall. "Leave it up," she said, to no one in particular, and everyone at once. "But leave it honest." The sign, mute and rectangular, reflected a small burst of chandelier light that made it look, for a second, crowned. Angela took 2 steps toward the door, then 3, then stopped at the edge of the winter rectangle on the floor. She turned back, not to savor victory. Victory was not the word, but to complete the work. She addressed the staff as a whole, and also the room, and also the many rooms in other cities that these people would someday stand in when a moment asked who they were. She did not ask for agreement. She offered direction. Her voice was even and carried without effort, the way a bell carries across snow. "From today, everything will change." Da, da. The video traveled the way winterlight does across polished stone, steady and unstoppable. In the days that followed, people washed on trains and in kitchens, in break rooms and at late-night counters, where the coffee is always fresh enough and the kindness is always free. By the end of the week, the clip had been echoed and subtitled and replayed with slow captions for careful eyes, the sound turned up for careful ears. What most viewers remembered was not the moment of revelation, but the manner of it. A woman speaking plainly, a policy returning to itself, a room tilting back toward level. On a bright, cold afternoon, Angela chose a small cafe near Rockefeller, the kind of place that seems to know regulars on site. The windows held wreaths tied with simple ribbon. The counter offered ginger loaf beside cinnamon rolls that left polite sugar on the plate. A glass jar labeled with a handwritten thank you stood near the register, coins and a few folded bills tucked inside. The barista greeted her with a cheerful hello that sounded like a neighbor's wave. Angela ordered a latte and took a table by the window where the tree glittered just enough to make the day feel ceremonious, without asking anyone to pretend it was perfect. She settled into the low hum of voices and porcelain, the soft thud of cups on saucers, the gloved hands holding doors for strangers, because that is what winter asks of decency. She had not come to savor victory. Victory was never the word. She had come to keep faith with ordinary life, to sit where people sit when the weather invites conversation and the city, for a short while, agrees to move at the pace of warmth. She unwrapped her scarf, placed it across the back of the chair, and rested her palms around the heat of the cup. The latte carried a leaf traced in the foam, a small flourish that made the drink a greeting. She took a sip and let her shoulders fall the half-inch that separates vigilance from ease. The door chimed and Margaret stepped in, cheeks wind-flushed, the same told over her shoulder. She spotted Angela and lifted a hand that managed to be both wave and blessing. "I hoped I would find you here," she said. sitting down without fuss, as if the chair had been expecting her. I want to say thank you properly. Not just for the store, but for the rooms in my life that remember a day like that when they need to stand up straighter. Angela smiled and patted Margaret's hand. We stood together, she said. You were there. Alden, Isabella arrived moments later, breathless in the way of young people who always seem to be walking slightly ahead of the schedule the world gives them. She slipped into the empty chair, set her phone face down on the table, an act of respect, and grinned. It has traveled, she said, and her eyes shone as if reflecting 1,000 small screens at once. Not because of drama, because it felt like what people want to believe is still possible. She recounted messages from strangers who recognized themselves in the frame, an aunt in Cleveland who had felt her own patients misnamed, a teacher in Denver playing the clip to a civics class, a retired clerk in Savannah who wrote that she had kept her badge number tucked in her wallet for years like a talisman against forgetting. Angela listened the way one listens to rain against a roof that has been mended just in time. David came in, cap in hand, scanning the room with the care of a man who never stops being a gentle lookout. He paused when he saw Angela and approached as if the space around the table were a porch, and he was stepping up to ask whether anyone needed anything from the store. I do not want to interrupt, he said, but I wanted to say what I could not say there. I am sorry for the part I played in making that room feel smaller than it had to be, and I am grateful it ended right. His voice was low, as if he were speaking to the space between them as much as to the women themselves. Angela shook his hand and answered with simple dignity. Thank you for keeping your voice soft when the room wanted a louder one, she said. Sometimes softness is what keeps a door from slamming. Bye. Bye. They made the small talk that is not small at all. How the wind finds corners and the best way to keep fingers warm, how lights look different reflected on wet pavement, which station plays carols without hurrying them. Isabella, unable to keep gladness entirely contained, described the comments that mattered most. Not the praise, but the relief. She showed only when invited. A few notes from people who had shared the clip with family members who needed a reminder that calm can be strong. Margaret told a story about a younger version of herself who once folded a scarf for a woman who had been told to leave a dress shop, and how she still wishes she had said more. You said enough last week, Angela replied. You put your presence near the counter, and it held. You can. Across the avenue, the rink shifted and glimmered. The tree caught sunlight and turned it into ceremony. After a while, Angela reached for her bag and took out a folded sheet of paper, the latest email from the regional office. It confirmed the training on policy, compliance, and bias mitigation, scheduled for late afternoon a few days hence, with attendance marked as required and follow-up as measured. It also attached a brief memo. The phrase, we curate an experience to be retired from internal scripts unless paired with the phrase, consistent with written policy. Angela smiled. Language had been asked to tell the truth about itself. Margaret leaned in to read the subject line and nodded. Good, she said, softly fierce. Good. Isabella raised her eyebrows, pleased by the plainness. People will see that sign differently now, she said. They will read it as a promise made to them, not to someone imagined behind the counter. Angela folded the email away. Promises belong to people, she said. That is what keeps them honest. Later, they walked together the short distance to Fifth Avenue, drawn not to shop but to witness. The boutique's windows had been refreshed with a new display. A winter scene rendered in miniature tiny cardinals perched on branches lit from within. On the door, at a readable height, a printed notice had been placed with deliberate care. We commit to anti-discrimination. Our posted policies are promises. If you experience otherwise, here is how to reach us. Beneath the words sat a direct line to the regional office and an assurance that complaints will be logged and answered, not just acknowledged. The lettering was simple, without flourish. Angela took it in the way one takes in a clear sky after days of fog, not as spectacle but as the rightful condition of a place. Mark stood inside, speaking with a small cluster of staff. His posture, once arranged to dominate, now looked more like a person learning to listen with his shoulders as well as his ears. When he saw Angela, he approached the door but did not open it, as if the glass had become a teaching instrument. He lifted a hand in a gesture that asked to be read as apology. Angela returned a small nod that asked to be read as acceptance of effort not erasure of fact. Susan, from behind the counter, watched with a puzzled expression that might soon choose its future shape. David resumed his place near the entrance. Steady as a lamppost that gives off warmth, they turned back toward the cafe. On the way, were stopped by two strangers who had recognized Angela from the clip. An older man in a navy cap said he had worked the register at a hardware store for 20 years, and that policies keep everyone honest when we let them. A woman carrying a paper bag of oranges thanked Angela for the way she spoke and the way she waited. "You made the room take its time," she said. "Sometimes that is the only way to make it fair." Angela listened and thanked them, and the conversation drifted naturally into the weather and the best bus line for avoiding the wind that whips down certain streets. Back at their table, the latte had cooled a little, but not enough to lose its comfort. Isabella propped her phone against the sugar caddy and recorded a short message addressed not to an audience, but to anyone who might need a reminder later. She spoke about patience that is not passive, about rules that are not decorations, about what it looks like when dignity puts on its coat and shows up. Margaret added one line in the voice of someone who has seen years enough to know that change is both stubborn and possible. "We will keep each other honest," she said. "That is how neighborhoods work." The afternoon began to draw itself shorter. People came in from the cold and returned to it. The tip jar filled by inches, and each small clink sounded like a decision to keep the world recognizable. Angela looked out at the plaza and thought about the many rooms the story had already visited without anyone needing to unlock a door. Kitchens at supper time, classrooms during last period, hospital waiting areas where people watch anything that reminds them rooms can become kinder before calls arrive. She thought too about the smaller rooms that live inside people, the ones where old shames sometimes pace and sometimes sleep, and she hoped that in a few of those, a window had been cracked open just enough to let in air. When it was time to go, they put on their coats slowly, as if they wanted the calf to understand it had done its job well. Angela placed a folded bill into the jar with a gentle tap to settle it among the coins. She thanked the barista by name. On the sidewalk, the city carried them along without rush, the three of them moving at a pace that allowed greetings to land and small courtesies to be performed. They paused at a crosswalk while a family hurried by, the parents holding mittened hands, the child in the middle singing a carol off-key and perfectly. Angela stopped once more in view of the rink and the tree. The scene did not feel like a celebration of her. It felt like a celebration of the kind of ordinary housekeeping that maintains a city's soul. A rule kept, an apology attempted, a notice posted with an address that will be answered. Isabella tucked her phone into her pocket, as if conceding that some moments are better kept by memory alone. Margaret slipped her hand through Angela's arm, a gesture that made them both steadier without either one leaning. Angela's voice, when it came, was not a speech, but a sentence delivered at the temperature of truth. Dignity is not a gift someone gives us. It is a right, and truth always finds its way to light. They stood for a breath and let the words do their work, not as headlines, but as habits. A breeze moved across the plaza and lifted a corner of someone's scarf with a playful tug. Somewhere close by, a choir began to rehearse, the altos finding their note with a hum that made the air feel like a held chord. The church bell nearby rang, signaling a new holiday season, but this time, a season of justice. The winter afternoon faded gently, leaving only the glow of lights reflected on polished streets and the quiet warmth of a cafe. Where ordinary voices carried extraordinary weight, what lingered was not the clash itself, but the calm insistence of a woman who asked only that rules be honored, and the way a community slowly leaned toward her side. From such moments, we are reminded that dignity is never a favor bestowed by power, but a birthright that finds its strength when we choose patience and truth over silence. Like a lantern set in the window of a long night, one steadfast act of fairness can guide others toward safer paths. If this story has touched you, take a moment to notice the small acts of justice and kindness around you, and when you can, pass that light along to someone still searching in the dark.